And welcome back to the sim. In this one, we're picking up right after we left off doing the switch panel for the CJ4. We've taxied out to the runway and we're going to take off momentarily and start using the Logitech Multi Panel that we've remapped using all of the LVARs and H events that we find inside of the CJ4. So let's jump into SPAD.next. Over here in SPAD.next now, let's go ahead and get everything configured. If you just want the details on getting the panel, let's get that out of the way first. You want to come to your multi-panel. You want to click on something, whether it's the display or a button, so that the buttons on the right-hand side show up. Let's go to Online Snippets. We want Multi-Panel Complete Device. Because this is specific to the working title CJ4, we're just going to go ahead and leave only current aircraft. Search for my name, the first part of it, less or, before you can get to anything else, it'll come out. Let's go ahead and expand this. So you're going to find the Microsoft Flight Sim working title CJ4 12.7 multi-panel. This is the one you want, and of course, as per the video tutorial, configuration for the CJ4 12.7. Click OK and replace everything. We're going to start off and go through the knob selector, which controls what the window display is showing you, as well as what the encoder is tied to. With the altitude selection, we're going to define the display value that goes along with that as the altitude lock variable 1. This is because when Working Title implemented the custom autopilot, they couldn't capture the event keys or whatever you want to call it. So basically they couldn't sit in between the sim and the peoples. So they used a different slot index for updating their variables, and then under the hood they use those to drive the sim data. So we use altitude lock variable 1 with the CJ4. I do this a lot now. I prefer it over acceleration. It just gives me the control I like. So from 0 until you get to 10,000, turning the knob is going to increment in 100s. When we get greater than 10,000, but still less than 18,000, we're going to increment and decrement by 500s. So let's go ahead, have a look at that. There you go. Incrementing and decrementing by 500s. Once we get above 18,000, we're going to go ahead and move into using increments of 1,000 feet. So there you have it. Don't forget, when you're doing things like this, always use the end processing value so that they don't jump on one another when they get close. The altitude and VS screens will always show when selecting altitude and VS on the selector. You cannot change the letters, the characters. Those are hard-coded into the Logitech firmware. The only thing we can do is update the values. Also with that is the VS values won't let us do decimals. So when we're dealing with the VS, we're going to do something special with pitch mode. So for VS, we're actually assigning 2 different display parameters and 2 different sets of encoder values. So let's start with the first one. When the working title CJ4 vertical speed custom mode is on, we're going to go ahead and read the value for vertical hold var 1. So the working title custom autopilot VS speed. Now, they drive the sim in heading and VS mode under the hood. So this is very important that we use variable 1. Otherwise, we're going to be reading what they're writing to the sim for controlling its pitch and roll modes effectively. When it's also in 1, then we're going to make the knob control the autopilot VS variable increase and decrease events. When the CJ4 VS is not on or a 0, instead what we're going to do is we're going to display, and we've gone with doing an expression. So an expression is a means to add some math around some data. So we grabbed our data, so we said add data, and we went off and we found the autopilot pitch hold reference, brought that in, which puts it in those square brackets. Now we wanted to round this off to 2 decimal places. So we used the round function, roundy bracket, comma 2, roundy bracket. That would round the pitch hold reference degrees from multiple digits to just 2 decimal places. And then what we're doing is we're multiplying by -10 because the pitch reference is actually inverted. So by multiplying by -10, we will now display the same pitch reference that's on the display. So we did that. And what's cool is, yeah, you can hit validate and it'll show you, like, it's going to show me 50.5. If you wanted to only round it to 1 decimal place to have a little bit more precision, you could do that. Well, less precision, I guess, more rounding. Hit validate, and of course now we're going to only be showing 50. We were automatically cutting off that extra bit anyway because we set the format to 2 zeros. So it would always force it to display 2 zeros for us. So now what you're seeing is 50, but because we can't do decimals, you have to read that as 5.0. And now when we turn the knob, we can see our pitch reference going down by 0.2, matching exactly the data in the sim. Perfect. So now I know I've dialed a 5-degree pitch up attitude. And of course, while VS is not on, we're also now, instead of sending VS variable increases, we're sending the autopilot pitch reference increase up and reference down. Moving on to the IAS mode, speed mode, or flight level change mode. Again, we can't change the characters. So what we're going to do with the display is we are going to read XML variable for airspeed is in Mach equals 0. We're going to operate in airspeed hold, so the airspeed hold variable with var1 increase and decrease, so that we could use the variable. If we wanted to change that and use the event, we could use the event. There's a few different ways. This one also opens up the ability to play around with acceleration if you want to be able to spin that speed up at a much faster rate. So if we went ahead and did that, it'll spin that multiplier up much faster. So it's up to you. You can decide, play with it, and make sure if you turn it on the clockwise direction, you also turn it on and match the values on the counterclockwise direction. When we are in Mach mode, we went with another one of these expressions. And that was to, again, take the Mach variable, round it off to 2 digits because it's 0.64, 0.72, and then multiply by 100. Because, again, we can't show decimals, and so we wanted to intentionally get it brought over to the positive side so we could display it. And we force it to 3 digits. So we'll always see a 0. So we can interpret it as 0.64 by having the extra digit always show up. Also, when in Mach mode, now instead we want the knob to increase or decrease the Mach variable. Heading mode is going to be displaying for us the heading information. And we want the autopilot heading lock direction 1, because again, this is very important in the working title CJ4, since they're driving the autopilot under the hood with regular heading mode. So that would be heading lock direction, And that's what the sim, so if you followed it, it would always be the heading you were flying. It would constantly change to the heading you were flying, not what you dialed in for a heading bug. So we've got that. And then on a clockwise turn, we're going to increment the heading lock direction by 1. Again, by using a data variable, we could enable acceleration so that when you're spinning the heading bug, you can get it moving at a faster rate. Again, feel free to turn this on or off in your settings. Do remember to do it on both sides with the exact same variables so it doesn't feel like it accelerates one way but not the other. Course mode has been set up so that when the LNAV mode equals 0, which means it's operating in GPS, we've got it set up. The current CJ4 DTK direct track LVAR, basically the track of the magenta line. When it's in LNAV mode 1, so the nav transfer switch, and you've got the green needles, this is now going to display for us nav OBS1, which is the course that is dialing in for nav1's radio. On a clockwise turn, we're going to send the working title CJ4 autopilot course 1 increment and course 1 decrement. So that lets us control the actual course knob. That way we're not just controlling the course alone. Coming down to the buttons. Autopilot. This is going to send Autopilot Master, which working title uses for its Autopilot Master. So away we go. We'll light the button up when Autopilot is on. We'll turn it off when the Autopilot is inactive. Heading mode. Heading mode is going to follow the working title CJ4 heading on LVAR. So their custom LVAR for their heading mode, whether it's active or not, to light the button. When we press the button for a long press, we're going to press the sync button. So on the heading knob, if you push it in the sim, that will sync the heading. We're going to press that same button and get the same heading sync. Button press for a short period. That's just tapping the button. That's going to turn on the working title heading mode. Pressing the little button labeled HDG up on the mode control panel or flight control panel, FCP. With our nav button, we're going ahead and we're tracking whether or not the working title CJ4 nav mode is on or off to light the LED. When you press the button for a short time, it presses the nav mode on the autopilot control. Then what we did for fun is we read the selector, and the selector value when in course is equal to 16. So when you have the selector here, if you hold down the nav button for 1 second, it will send the pushing of the course knob, which is supposed to give you a direct. So it's supposed to nav you direct to, say, the VOR that you were tracking to, or the nav station you were tracking to. And what's neat is this will only trigger that event if you are specifically on the course selector. So that's pretty cool. So that's another idea you can have about, even on the nav button, we could go ahead and we could put multiple controls for the same button press, whether it's a long or a short, because we can add these conditions to check other things. And in this case, we're checking the multi-panel selector, and the way this works, it seems to be like 0, 1, I think it's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. It's some weird way it's calculating its position. But what's nice is you can always move the selector, look at this data value in the plus key, the data monitor. You can monitor this and you can see what it's doing. On the speed button, we're tracking the working title flight level change mode. If it's on, light the button up. If it's off, turn it off. When you press it for a short time, so a push of less than 1 second, it's going to send the working title CJ4 autopilot flight level change pressed. So that's an H event. It's one of those H variables that you need to send to it. And then when we do a long press, we're actually going to push the speed knob. And that's going to move us between IAS and Mach modes. Altitude, we're going to go ahead and track their altitude mode. Again, a 0 and a 1. Turns the LED on or off. Short press is pressing their altitude button on the control panel with an H event. And then the long press is pushing the knob, which is the altitude alert cancel, by pushing the knob. So if you want to cancel the altitude alerter. On the VS button, we've gone ahead and we're tracking the VS mode. If it's on or off, light the button. If you press the button, you're pressing the CJ4 H event for VS pressed. Now, I did consider using long mode, which would flash the button, for VNAV. And then a long press could have been setting the VNAV button. But I went and put VNAV on the reverse button again. I could have used backcourse here. We could have used this button maybe repurposed for the yaw damper, because then we could have had the LED for it, plus a button for the yaw damper. I do have that on other panels, but it's an idea. You could move VNAV to a long press on one of these other buttons and free up, say, the rev button to put yourself a yaw damper button. It's going with the LNAV, or sorry, the VNAV mode. If VNAV is on, it'll light it up. As VNAV is off, it will turn it off, and pressing it will press the VNAV event. And then, of course, approach mode is setting the approach mode. They don't have a custom LVAR for approach mode, which would have been nice because they added that to the NXI. We'd be able to track different states of the LVAR and decide when we wanted the button to be lit. I used the auto throttle button for the flight director, toggling the flight director on and off. I left the flaps with a flaps increase and decrease. I didn't know what other people maybe wanted to do with this. This could have been used for a couple of different things. I've seen people use it with the yaw damper autopilot disconnect paddle. So the main bar, it's pretty cool use because you could push it down to do the big full disconnect, you know, treat it like that same emergency bar that's on the screen. Pitch trim for sure. This is a great use of pitch trim. I find it especially helpful when you're working with altitudes and other constraints. It's really nice to have the pitch trim set up to do your pitch reference for your autopilot or your VS speeds. And basically it mimics the wheel that's on the mode controller as well. So you've got that same kind of wheel cool function going on with the mode control panel. Keep in mind, we've also got the power tied to the avionics master switch. So when the avionics master switch goes on in the CJ4, then the power comes on. Obviously, you can't turn off the backlight on these, but it does turn off all of the characters and letters at least. Let's hop into the sim and let's take the CJ4 for a bit of a trip and use the panel with it. So we've already gone ahead and we've gone and we put in a flight plan. Good, that doesn't block it. So real quick flight plan, we're gonna take off runway 14 using the CYOW for departure off of runway 14, which is basically climbing straight out to 780 feet, and then you're going to be on vectors to get somewhere. We've intentionally gone and put in Visel, which is a waypoint out this way, give us something, as well as Ezrov. So we're going to head a little bit further out to Ezrov, which is near Karp. This is a jet. It's going to move pretty quick. And then we'll go from Ezrov. We will start our approach. And so for our approach, we're going to be doing the RNAV Zulu into Ottawa. Taking a look at the chart for our approach. So you can see we're going to take off basically this direction. We're going to come around. We're going to head over this way. On our way, we will go direct to Megno. 3,500 feet at Megno, and then we'll hit Rafno and we'll fly the approach. This way we can use heading mode, we can use nav mode. We'll try to get up high enough, so we'll use VNAV down to Megno, And then we'll go ahead and throw it into approach mode. Now that we've reviewed our approach, we've reviewed the departure. Let's just go ahead, get going. We got our lights on, and let's take our parking brake off. And stabilized. Pitot heat is good. And toga. Takeoff mode is set. See the TO. Saw the pitch go up to 10 degrees. That would be one of my scripts running that runs on the script panel. Tells me I had positive rate, so I go gear up. And let's go ahead and get our flaps up. And yeah, we're climbing. So let's go ahead and let's activate flight level change mode. And let's give ourselves a speed of 240. And let's go ahead and get our autopilot on. Yes, it climbs really fast. So we're going to bring the power back and let it do its thing while it speeds up to 250. There we go. Flight plan discontinuity. Of course there is. Legs. Because we now need to go to... I guess we go to direct page. Let's go direct visal. And we will execute that. And so now we can turn our heading bug. And let's go into heading mode. There we go. Once we turn this around. So at this point, we're also going to arm nav mode. So we can see it arms, gives us that LNAV 1 in white. So we're armed and ready to go. Altitude arriving. All right, so we're on our way to visal. And then Megno will be our first restriction at 3,500. So we're already up there quick. There we go. And as soon as it started coming in, we get that green transition LNAV 1, and it makes the turn to intercept. So now that we're at 8,000, we want to set up for our VNAV. So let's go ahead and let's set up our altitude selector. And let's put it down to that 3,500. And let's press the reverse button, which we now have programmed for our VNAV. So as we can see, we've got our VNAV. It's in. We can see what it's giving us for the donut. Now we just wait for all of that. So at this point, let's go ahead and let's go direct to Megno. And of course, our VNAV path is now off, so we're going to have to VS this down to catch up to our path. And we'll pull the power, throw out our speed brake. And yeah, so this is like, obviously, you wouldn't really do this, but this is an example of how you can recapture the VPath. So we're now descending at 4,300 feet per minute, hoping to recapture. So there you go. The VPath is starting to come in, and it's coming in at a rapid pace, and it went green for VPath. So we'll go ahead, let that capture.
You have reached top of descent.
So we're Megno to our IAF of RAFNO. 3,500 according to the plate is also the altitude to do for the approach. We're going to go ahead and arm approach mode. And now we can see that RNAV is green and altitude select. All right, approach mode. RNAV 1, and in comes the glide path. There's the GP, and we have at RAFNO, we have picked up our glide path. We're going to start slowing down. We have our diamond. Yeah, all fat. We're at the FAF, 2,100, 2,000 feet. Yep, we're right in place. Let's go ahead and throw our gear down. And we are already at flaps 35 speed, so we can go ahead and get our flaps out. Working the autopilot modes, everything seems to be working. We were able to manage flight level change speed, VS speed. We were able to use VNAV. We were able to use heading mode. You name it, it all worked just fine. So as we're heading in for this landing, guys, do me a favor. Go ahead, smash that like button. If you like the content you've been seeing on this channel, feel free to subscribe. And as always, come on back on the next one, because we're going to be working on the Alpha and Bravos next for the working title CJ4 to finish off our kit. Well, thanks for watching. Have a great day.